Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, the Hellblazer podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 179, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on. In the last couple issues, we learned that there's a man named Mr. Fredericks who is looking for something called the Red Sepulchre. He doesn't know what it is, and him and his goons have been looking for it in the antiques that they stole from a man named Nicholas Gillis, who they killed and are torturing his soul to try to have him tell them what the Red Sepulchre is, but he doesn't know either. But he had an idea that maybe the people in the Constantine bloodline did. So because John was thought dead, they got the next Constantine they could, and that was Gemma, his niece. So she's working with these bad guys. She does not realize how bad they are, I think. And now that they know that John is alive, they're using Gemma as blackmail so that he will identify the Red Sepulchre among the many things they stole from Nicholas Gillis's collection. And that's pretty much where we left off, with John agreeing to do this so that he would save his niece. So first things first, with issue 179, we got the cover. It is a little different because it's stark white in the background. And on top of that, we have a collage of images. We have the magician tarot card on either side of the top. Then in the middle, there's three goons. They all have guns, and the two on the side, we can't see their face. But the man in the middle, we can definitely see everything about him. He's holding an assault rifle. And to his right, there is a skull with bullets raining down. And on his left, there is John, and he's looking out at us holding a glass of alcohol, and he's got a cigarette in his fingers. And connecting kind of all of these images is a triangle that's underlaid behind them. And then there's some shapes that look like eyes, but there's three of them, and they are in bright red. And one of them is vertical, like it would be the third eye on the middle of your forehead. And we also see on this cover that this is written by Mike Carey with art by Marcelo Fruzin. And as we turn to the first page, we start off in a flashback where we're seeing images of British-occupied India, where they have made slaves of the people, and we're seeing people getting like herded, and then we're seeing someone getting strangled, and there's a particular man that's focusing on in most of these panels. And over them, we're getting some narration from John saying, well, first off, it wasn't a Constantine. It was a Quinn, me mother's side of the family. A gormless little pants leg called Aloysius. He was in Jabalapur with the British Army in 1840, stamping out the cults by stamping on the locals, hard, which for reasons of satire, we refer to as the white man's burden. In southern India, the cultists called themselves the Fansaga, the deceivers. They thought murder was a religious duty, like very vigorous praying. Come and see the Samshia. He knows all the names, all the temples, everything. If Aloysius had been a Constantine, he'd never have fallen for a line like that. But he was a Quinn, poor bloody infantry with a kick-me-son on his back for all the world to see. So he said, yeah, take me to your leader. And in the bottom of this page, we're seeing Quinn being talked to by a man who's saying that Quinn should come see the Shamsia, and he fell for that, and now he's being led, I'm assuming by these cultists, into a dark building where he is immediately attacked, and we see a large Indian man grab his arms from behind and hold him, while another skinnier Indian man with bright white eyes, he was actually the man killing someone in the panel on the page before, and that man is running at Quinn with his arms held up high like he's about to attack him. And the narration continues. It was a 2-for-1 deal. He got to see the Shamsia, the bloke who holds your hands behind your back, and the Bertot, the bloke who finishes you off. Then we see the two Indian men throw Quinn's body into a pit, and he lands on top of a bunch of other rotting dead bodies. And John's narration continues. They'd never done a white man before. That's why they killed him with the Red Sepulchre, the Holy of Holies. It was a big honor. They took him out the back to the charnel pits, and they threw him in. Only the poor bastard wasn't dead. Not quite. So we can see Quinn's eyes open, and it looks like he's had the wind knocked out of him as he lays on top of these dead bodies. And as John mentioned in his narration, He was killed by the Red Sepulchre, but they didn't show exactly what that was in any of the panels. We just saw like the before and the after of the attack. And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Red Sepulchre Part 3. And as we turn the page, we cut out of that flashback to the present day where John is talking to Mr. Fredericks in a gazebo outside at night. So he was telling Fredericks the whole history and lore of what this Red Sepulchre is. But Fredericks is getting impatient and he says to John, "This is not Darky Sunday School, Mr. Constantine. I didn't ask for parables. According to this version of the story, the Red Sepulchre is..." And John cuts him off by saying, "A weapon made by Jamadar Gur, the leader of the sect. A weapon blessed by Kali, the death goddess. So the souls of everyone it's ever killed stay inside it. Hence the name, see?" Then John continues his story and we go back to the flashback where we see Quinn being pulled out of the pit by his fellow British soldiers, and then we see him as an old man sitting in a wheelchair and he's missing a leg. And over these panels, John is saying, "They got Aloysius out of there 3 days later, raving, crying, and stinking of gangrene. Had to amputate an arm and a leg to keep him alive. He lived to a ripe old age, and he'd tell the story to any sod who'd listen. Never told it the same way twice, though, and he was always cagey about what they'd actually done to him. But he swore to God his soul was in the Red Sepulchre. Only his body had come back from India. And when he died, they had his wake with the coffin lid closed to hide his face." Then we come out of that flashback, and we see John and Mr. Fredericks aren't alone on this gazebo. There is an old man who is missing an arm and a leg sitting in a wheelchair, and he looks a lot like Aloysius. So I guess maybe since they didn't see his face in the coffin, we could assume that Mr. Fredericks kidnapped Aloysius and brought him here so that he would tell him what the Red Sepulchre was. But apparently Aloysius didn't speak because that's why he needed John here. So once John finishes his story, he's looking at Aloysius, and he says while staring at him, but I'm not sure if he's talking to Fredericks or Aloysius, "Right, your turn. Let's have one with vampires in it, eh?" Then we get a different angle in the gazebo, and we see that it wasn't just John, Fredericks, and Aloysius there, it was also Gemma, and she heard the whole story as well. And she says to John, "That was so cool, Uncle John. How do you know all this stuff?" And as she says this, she has a really weird look on her face, like her eyes are really open wide and bugging out, and it looks like she has a fake smile. And I can't tell if she's manic or if she's pretending or if she's actually kind of happy to be here around John and Fredericks. So after she said it was interesting, Fredericks, who isn't even looking at John, he's staring at the stars, says, "It was interesting. It bears out my own researches in several important respects." Then John stands up and goes over to him and says, "You said we could have a moment or two alone before I get down to work." And Fredericks looks down at him and says, "Yes, of course." And then he walks away, continuing saying, "I'm sure you've got a lot of catching up to do." So once he leaves the gazebo, we see Gemma run over to John and say, "God, Uncle John, this is just great. You and me working together." And she gives him a big hug, and John, who doesn't really know what to do, says, "Yeah, it's 7 kinds of wonderful, Gemma. Course, I wouldn't be me if I didn't have a few little niggles." And then he pulls out Gemma's postcards from his jacket, and he hands them to her, and he says, "Like, you piss off to London to hang out with these loveless twats, and you lie your arse off to your mom and dad so they won't call the police. What's that about?" And then he's walked away from her because in the next panel there's some distance between them, and they're kind of in the darkness now outside of the gazebo, and she's kind of taken aback and surprised at John's response because she says, "But I'm doing amazing things here. I'm out on the edge where you live, learning the family business." And John replies, "The family... Jesus frickin' Christ, Gemma. You haven't twigged what's going on? You're a bloody hostage. You stay alive as long as I play ball." And as they're talking, they're walking away from the gazebo and just kind of around Frederick's estate. And to John pointing out that she's being held hostage, she says, "What?" And John points at her and continues saying, "And these bastards had some heavies stalking out your mum as well, on the principle of waste not, fucking want not." And it seems like Gemma's pretty taken aback by this information because she rubs a tear from her eyes and says, "No, that's not true. Mr. Fredericks brought me in because I've got talent, magic talent, and he's been teaching me. I can see what you're doing now. You don't want the competition? Well, sod you then. I'll do it on my own. Then she runs off, and John doesn't really follow her. He just says, Gemma, for fuck's sake. But then she's gone, and then we see a man walk up behind John, and it is Joshua Wright. And he puts his hand on John's left shoulder, and John doesn't really turn around or acknowledge him. He just stares after Gemma with a very sour look on his face. But Joshua Wright, who's got a big smile, says, Time's up, Constantine. You've got work to do. Then we turn the page and we cut to Clarice and her husband Albert and this demon that they've called up. And the demon's saying to them, Now, which one of you is going to be first? And then he looks at Clarice and her husband and he says, The old man, I think. Female flesh has a rankness that takes the edge off the enjoyment. Don't struggle, son of Adam. I haven't eaten a thing since Christ died, and I'm in no fucking mood for foreplay. So as he grabs Albert and looks like he's about to kill him, Clarice stops him by saying, Sorry, dear heart. It's in the tenancy agreement. Pets to be kept on leash. And then he looks down and sees that there's a rope on his foot, and it is attached and tied to the body of Packer. So he throws Albert on the ground and says, Chained to this carrion. Bitch, you summoned me through an auger hole. But Clarice isn't really scared or anything. She just smiles and says, I'm no debutante, darling. And looking at you, I'd say you're an old hand too. So you know you'll rot as that body rots unless you deal with us. So the demon thinks it over, but he's trying to intimidate her still as he says, Perhaps I like decay, little clod of earth. Perhaps I'd rather decay than deal. But Clarice, who's still not scared, says, Then we're wide open. Enjoy. But the demon was bluffing, so he says, What bargain do you propose? And she answers, Well, it's the usual, isn't it, dear heart? The night, the moon, and an old friend for dinner. Then we turn the page and we cut to John inside of the room that's full of boxes of the collection of Nicholas Gillis. And there's a couple goons in there with him, I guess just to make sure he's not doing anything wrong. And John is looking at a list, and as he's reading it, he says, Sword, leather purse, statue of a horse. And then he asks the goons, In words of one syllable or less, what the fuck is this supposed to be? And one of the goons answers, We picked up everything Gillis had, didn't we? We know the Sepulchre's in here somewhere, and Mr. Fredericks told us to make a list. And John says, Did he now? Well, you can start again, you daft pair of bleeders. Only this time, sort out everything that could be a weapon and put it in a pile over there by the wall. And then the other goon stands up and pokes his finger into John's chest, and he says, I don't like you much. And John smiles at him and says, Nobody said you had to, but I bet you were told to keep me happy, right? So just do it. So that goon turns around and starts getting the boxes and rummaging through them, looking for weapons. And the other guy says to John, 300-odd boxes? There's going to be an effing reckoning, Constantine. And John just stares at him and says, Yeah, hold that thought, unless it takes up too much space. And he says that because he sees something on the ground, and as he goes over to it, we see it is the duffel bag that the Russian had when he was originally visiting Nicholas and he was killed by Frederick's men. And the duffel bag is completely empty, so it's just a sack on the ground pretty much. And it has loops on top where there's a rope running through it. And as John bends down to look at it, he says, Hey, Peek, what's this? And why isn't it in one of those boxes? And Peek answers, It's the Sailor Doll's duffel bag. Mr. F said to take everything. And as John picks it up off the ground and stands, he asks, Empty? And Peek answers, Of course it's bloody empty. And then John reaches inside to double check, and as he does, he asks, And what did Mr. F say he's looking to do with this sexy little item once he finds it? And Peek answers, We don't ask. We're not fucking stupid. And now that John has confirmed the duffel bag is empty, he tosses it aside, and he smiles as he jokingly says, No, it's midnight. You're groveling in shite, and you're not even on overtime. Then he takes a seat on some of the boxes and leans back, and he closes his eyes as he says, Keep up the good work, lads. And anything with an edge or a spike sticking out of it, You bring it to teacher, okay? Then we turn the page and we cut to Mr. Fredericks in his bedroom asleep. And he's dreaming, so we get some panels of him inside that dream, and he's naked on his knees in a grassy field, and there's some smoke swirling around in the distance, and we see two red eyes appear. And over this, the narration says, Domine Fredericks prefers not to dream. He likes the real world, where he's strong and solid, where pain and the threat of pain are dogs that fawn at his heel. In dreams, it's different. In dreams, he kneels in a dark place. He hears snuffling breath, huge paws scrabbling at loose earth. The hound is coming, digging its way through, and he weeps like a woman because he knows what it's coming for. Then we see the red eyes become bigger, and there's now teeth attached to them in the darkness. Then we see a wolf engulfed in flames, rushing at and attacking Domine Fredericks. And Mr. Fredericks is trying to block the wolf, but he is catching on fire, and the narration continues saying, He tries to raise his hands. He used to start awake at this point, but recently, the night has not been so kind. And we can see that Fredericks is definitely screaming out in fear as this wolf is continuing its attack. Then we cut to the outside front gates of Mr. Fredericks' house, and it's still nighttime, and there's a man approaching, and we see two guards notice him walking towards them, and as he gets closer to them, he says,
Excuse me, is this where Domine Fredericks lives?
And we're getting like glimpses of this guy. We haven't seen his face, but you might be able to tell from his voice who it is, but we get little glimpses of what he's wearing, and we can see that there's blood covering his trench coat that he has on. So to his question if Mr. Fredericks lives here, one of the guards says, Who the fuck wants to know? And the man answers,
I have a message for Fredericks and for Constantine.
And the guard says, You stop here, sunshine. A message, is it? And the man answers,
Yes, from Clarice Sackville.
And as the guard takes that in, we do see that there's fresh blood dripping off the bottom of the trench coat. And the guard doesn't notice it, though, as he says, Well, being as how you stink like a busted toilet, you'd better give it to me, and I'll see that it gets delivered. Then we finally see who the man talking is, and it is the body of Packer, and we can assume that the devil is inside of Packer's body, and he's kind of using it as a puppet. So Packer looks at the guard, and he says,
To you, well, perhaps. I suppose I could do that. It goes like this.
And then the arms of Packer open his trench coat, and we see two glowing red eyes appear, and then the demon that Clarice summoned jumps out of his chest and tears the guard in half, and then punches the head of the second guard off his body. And while the demon is doing this, he gives his message saying,
You're dead.
And then we get a panel that shows the body of Packer walking towards the house after it is smashed through the front gates, so we can assume the demon's back in his body. Then we turn the page, and we are back in the room where the goons are separating all the weapons into a pile, and the alarm is going off because of what is going on out front. And as the two goons unholster their weapons, one of them says, Fuck, that's the perimeter alarm. Some bastard's trying to break in. And as they run out of the room, one turns to John, who's still sitting on the boxes, and says, Lock the door, Constantine. Don't open it to anyone but us. And John says, Don't worry about me, mate. My survival instincts got instincts of its own. And now that the guards are gone, he begins walking around looking for something, and then he comes to a large mirror and he says, Bingo. Then he crosses his arms and stares at his reflection, and he says, Map, are you still hanging around? I'm buggered if I'm going to say mirror, mirror. And then the large face of Map appears in the mirror, and he says, I'm here, John Constantine. And John uncrosses his arms and says, Good, because there's enough shit going down to manure the whole of Kent, and I need some backup. I'm thinking of Gutta Inferna, or the Stolen Light Lodge. Follow my lead, yeah? Frederick's a fuckwit, but I'm gonna need something good to take Josh Wright in. And Map replies, I'm not making you any promises, John Constantine. I do not trust you. The easiest way to stop Frederick's plan would still be to kill you. And John stares at Map's face and says, Yeah, but you'd have to do it, wouldn't you? And you'd have to do it bloody quick. If I have to sell out to keep Gemma alive, Map, I'll do it. What have you got that'll stop me? Then we turn the page and we cut to what's going on at the front doors, and we see them burst open, and the goons that are inside begin firing at the body of Packer, who's riddled with bullets, but of course he's already dead, so the body falls back, but the demon comes from his chest and yells,
"Now I'm beginning to grow angry."
And as he takes a bite out of the first guard, he says,
"That's such a lovely feeling."
Then the two guards who are guarding Constantine run out into the hall and see this demon, and one of them says, "Mother in Christ, what is that thing?" And the other guard says, "Never mind what it is. It's not to get through to Mr. Fredericks." Then a third guard joins them, and they all three open fire on the giant demon that's coming up the stairs towards them, and one of them yells, "And how the fuck are we meant to stop it?" Then we see Joshua Wright come out, and he's got an AK-47 in his hands, and he takes assessment of the situation and notices the rope that is tied to the demon's foot that is also tied to the body on the ground, and he yells to the goons, "The body on the doorstep! Rip it apart!" So all three men open fire with their guns on the body and is blowing it to pieces, and as it does, the demon yells, "No!" And because the demon's health is tied to the condition of Packer's body, as it is blown to pieces, the demon begins to crack, and we see light and fire coming out from inside of it until it's completely burned up, and all that's left is the smoking body of Packer on the ground. Then from one of the doorways, we hear some clapping, and the goons turn to point their guns at who it is, but it is John. Then we see Fredericks coming down the stairs in his bathrobe, and he asks Wright,
"Joshua, what's the meaning of this? What happened here?"
And Joshua Wright turns and looks at him and says, "Someone sent a summoning. Must be the Tate crowd. I didn't see Clarice Sackwell or her pet zombie in among the bodies." Then Fredericks chastises him, saying,
"You should have mentioned that before, Joshua. I would have them dealt with."
And Joshua says, "Lend me Peake and Goodall. I'll deal with them inside of half an hour." Then John chimes in saying,
"And I'll mind the shop. Lovely."
And John was saying that because some of the guards got killed in that fight with the demon. So Fredericks and Wright stare at the dead bodies, and Fredericks says,
"I'm afraid he's right. We are a little short-handed now."
So Wright says, "Then there's an obvious solution, isn't there? Goodall can stay and watch the girl. I'll take Constantine." And as John takes a cigarette in his mouth, he says, "To kill an old friend? Nah, I'll pass, thanks. If it's all the same to you." But then Joshua comes over very angrily and grabs the pack of cigarettes from John's hand, and he smashes them as he says, "Your old friend tried to murder you the night you got here. It was Peake and Goodall pulled your balls out of the balefire. Think of it as an intelligence test, because if you're clever, you'll know how much I can do to that niece of yours and still leave her alive." And John is not happy about that sentence, but he does decide to go with Joshua Wright, so he just starts walking, leaving them standing there, and as he walks through the shards of the front door, he says, "Might avail. Albert's got a gaff down there. Some other bastard can drive." Then we cut to the hideout of Clarice and Albert, and Clarice is saying, "It didn't work." And Albert asks, "What do you mean?" And Clarice says, "I just felt the auger hole close. The demon's gone. We fed Packer to the wolves for nothing. Oh, Albert, we've made a terrible mess of all of this." And Albert says, "We did what we had to do, Clarice. Playing along with Fredericks was the only chance we had of getting a hold of that bloody object before he did." And Clarice says, "Well, we didn't manage, did we? And now John's going to be—" But she's cut off by the phone ringing near her, and she stands up in fear, backing away from it as she says, "Who knows we're here?" And Albert answers, "Nobody. Nobody's got this number." So it keeps ringing until the answering machine picks up saying, "Hello, I can't come to the phone right now." Then we cut to outside the building where we see John and Josh Wright and another goon waiting outside down below. And John is on a cell phone and he's saying, "Hello, Clarice, pick up the phone. It's me, John." Then we hear the goon ask Josh Wright, "Are you sure this is the right place? It looks like a bloody warehouse." Then we cut to the inside of the room where Clarice is answering the phone and she's saying, "John, I'm here. Albert's here too. We've got to talk to you." And we hear John reply, Well, that's what I'm here for, love. Tell you what, though. I'll go first. Then we cut to John down below, and he's saying, you were in this with Fredericks, right? You told him where to find Gemma. And then what? You were going to slip the knife in at some point and run off with the Sepulchre yourselves? Then we cut to Gemma in the room, and as we see her mascara running from her crying, she's saying, we were going to destroy it, but he didn't let us get close enough. John, you must know the power that's in this thing. What else could we do? And John answers, well, you could have trusted me, Clarice, but you didn't. So maybe you'll trust me now. Go ahead and look out of the window. And then he hangs up, and then he turns to Wright and says, over to you. This is your specialty, isn't it? Then we cut to Albert and Clarice in the room, and as she slowly walks towards the window, Albert says, window? Sod that! We've got to get out of here now, girl! But Clarice doesn't stop walking, and she says, if he's in with Fredericks, then it's already too late, Albert. No, he's right. We should have trusted him. He's a slippery bastard, but he stands by his friends. And as she says that, she walks over to the window and pushes open the curtains wide, and she can be seen easily from the ground. And as she looks down at the three men standing there, we see the goon with something in his hand, and he throws it through the window she's standing in, and it is a grenade. And the last panel of this issue is a large explosion from far away, so we don't really see exactly what's getting blown up, but we're left to believe that John has just tricked Clarice and Albert, and that they are dead now. And with that cliffhanger, that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.